Hi everyone, it's Jeff with Eat a Squirrel here, and today I'll be showing you how I shred my squirrel after it's done cooking in the sous vide. So as you can see from the sous vide timer, we have been cooking the squirrel for quite some time, in fact over 48 hours now, at a temperature of 161 degrees Fahrenheit. So now it's time to turn off the sous vide machine and remove it and drain all that water out. Remember, this is really hot water, so you don't want to be reaching in there with your bare hands because it will burn depending on the temperature that you selected. So we're going to pour all the water out and then reach in and grab that bag. So now that we've drained the water and we've gotten the bag out of the sous vide container, the next thing we're going to do is drain all of the liquids from the bag. As you can see, the bag has filled up with a considerable amount of liquid, and these liquids aren't necessarily from the bag leaking, it's more from the squirrels releasing their natural juices during the cooking process. So the way we're going to cut the bag open is we're just going to cut a small corner of it out, and this lets us drain the juices without spilling the meat all over into the sink. And depending on how many squirrels you cooked, you might have to shake the bag a little bit to get all of the liquid out. Remember, we don't want this liquid spilling onto our cutting board when we're ready to shred the squirrel. So that's why we're draining it over the sink right now. You'll definitely want to shake the bag to make sure that all of the liquid comes out. Remember, you don't want any of this on your cutting board because it will make a mess. Now we take our bag and cut it open the normal way, and the squirrels should just slide out. Now, depending on how long you've been cooking the squirrels might fall apart the instant they hit the cutting table. This is completely normal and doesn't mean anything bad about the food. It's just because they've been cooking so long that their muscle and bone structure are on the verge of falling apart. In fact, this is something that will make the squirrel easier to shred, which is why I recommend such long sous vide times, at least 24 hours, and in this case today we did almost 49 hours of sous vide cooking. You're going to want to get a bowl now, and this bowl is going to hold just the meat. So we're going to separate the meat from the bones. And like I said before, it'll be really easy the longer you sous vide the squirrel. Now the squirrel's still going to be really hot at this point, so I recommend putting on a pair of latex gloves to give yourself a little bit of protection. This gives the added benefit of making it less of a mess to get off of your hand because the latex gloves provide that barrier. So we're going to remove those 3 bay leaves that we had on there before, and we're going to take the squirrel apart limb by limb. I like to start with the legs, although you can start with any limb you want. So for the squirrel's legs, there's only 3 major bones. There is the femur, the tibia, and the fibula, just like the bone structure in human legs. So you don't have to worry about any little rib bones that might be coming out because there are none. So all you do here is you gently pull away the meat from the bone. And again, if you cooked it for long enough, this should be a very easy process. You can discard the bones, or some kids like to bring in squirrel bones for a science project. So if you have a kid, you might want to consider saving it for them. So onto the next leg, it's the same process. Just separate the meat from the squirrel, like so. So moving up the squirrel, I take out its lower back. The vertebrae should separate super easily from each other. And in male squirrels, there is often this little part near the base of the tail. You'll want to throw that out. That does not taste good at all. Around the spine of the squirrel, you'll find a little bit of tough skin-like meat. You can throw that out as well. That's part of the squirrel's outer tissue, and it also contains some body fat. The most tender meat, however, is right under it, right next to the spine. And that's because the squirrel doesn't use these muscles very often, not so often as the arms or legs. Be careful when you're peeling meat around the spinal column. The vertebrae do detach from each other and they can get really small. So you'll want to mush the meat around in your fingers a little bit just to make sure that you aren't depositing any bones into your bowl. Now I proceed to the arms, and in the arms there are three major bones. There is the humerus on the upper arm and the radius and ulna that make up the lower arm of the squirrel. Again, very similar to human biology. So as long as I peel the meat around those bones, it'll be safe. Now the arms are attached to the shoulder bone, and the shoulder bone does contain quite a bit of tender meat. Just make sure to peel around the shoulder bone and discard both the arm bones and the shoulder bones when done. Now onto the other arm, and just a quick tip. You want to be really careful when you're taking out the arms of the squirrel. Sometimes you can get a rib bone or two in there. So again, rib bones are really small, and they're the bones that often make it into the meat just because of their size. You'll want to be really careful here. Now, I saved the squirrel's rib for last for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is really notoriously easy to get rib bones mixed up with the meat. And number two, there is not a lot of meat here to begin with. In fact, a lot of squirrel eaters will completely discard the rib bones or save them for something else like squirrel stock. However, if you're really careful, you can get just a little bit more meat out of here. So I like to lay the squirrel belly down and start peeling from the top. When you peel from the top, there is a very thin layer of muscle that separates from the rib bones. But again, seeing how small these pieces are, you want to be really careful here. There's also some really tender meat around the upper back near the spine, just like there was with the lower back. But again, with all those rib bones in the way, you want to make sure to mush the meat around in your hands, checking that there are no rib bones in the way. And that is the basic procedure of separating meat from bone. Now, you'll obviously repeat this for all of the other squirrels that have been cooking. So I'm just going to speed up this footage and let you watch. Okay, so now that we've separated the meat from both of our squirrels, it's time to shred the meat that's in the bowl. For this, you can do it by hand, but I much prefer to use two forks, holding them in both my right and left hand, and pulling the meat through just like you would do with pulled pork. And it's the whole reason this recipe is called pulled squirrel or shredded squirrel. So take the meat between the tines and separate them with the forks. Make sure to churn around the bowl a little bit, turning pieces over so that you get all of the squirrel meat. At this point, you're probably wondering, where's the barbecue sauce or where are the additional seasonings? Well, the answer is we're not going to put in the sauce or the seasonings yet until we reheat this meat for our pulled squirrel sandwiches or just enjoying the pulled squirrel on its own. All right, so we are done shredding our squirrel. That took about 2.5 minutes. And as you can see, it looks pretty shredded. There aren't any huge chunks of meat in there anymore. And that's the result we want. So now it's time to just cover this up and put it in the fridge. And when we're ready to eat, we can cook as much of it or as little of it as we want. Stay tuned. And in the next episode, we'll show you how to make the final preparations for some delicious pulled squirrel. This is Jeff from Eat a Squirrel. If you like this video, be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. Thank you.